You know, it's so nice to be in a space where great design and technology are working well together. And I was just recently in a space like this. It wasn't just simply the design of the space, it was also the lighting, the furniture, the digital artwork. It all just felt right. Like it was meant to go beyond just functioning, but to also make you feel better. And you know what? It really did. And so it made me think, why can't every space feel like this? At Bialik, we think about that question a lot. We've spent over 40 years helping to create spaces that do more than just function. They inspire healing, connection, and care. And what I've learned is that continuing to stay curious, thinking about our future generations, and a little bit of wonder is how we will continue to push the envelope in this field. And so that's why we started this podcast called Wellness and Wonder. I'm your host, Raj Banga, and I get a chance to learn from some of the most brilliant and visionary minds that are hard at work, exploring how design and technology can change the way we experience health and wellness for the better. This is Wellness and Wonder. Okay, raise your hand. Who believes the healthcare industry in the United States is complicated? Excellent. That was very quick and unanimous. We all agree. If I can ask another question, what aspect of the healthcare industry is the most complex? Is it just trying to schedule appointments, reducing costs, dealing with billing? I mean, of course, no doubt. Those are very complicated. Actually seems that they're getting more and more complicated by the day. But those are topics for another podcaster to tackle. Well, what about designing a healthcare space? Do you realize how complicated that can be? I mean, where does a designer even start? That's the big question that my guests today have tackled head on. John Rothenberg and Eric Gunther from Boston-based design studio SOSO have developed a set of design principles, each backed by a prototype, that seamlessly blends a digital component and a physical component to shape better healthcare spaces. It was a great and fascinating conversation I had with them, full of fresh ideas and just real hope for the future. And so wherever you are, I hope you can get comfortable and join me as I sit down with John and Eric from SOSO. It's great to have you here on our first inaugural podcast that we're calling Wellness and Wonder. Really thrilled to have you both here for a discussion today. We've had a number of different conversations here in prepping and getting to this point. But just for the listeners, I wanted to recap a little bit about how we got connected here. It's been a little over 2 years now since we built out our new office space here just outside of Washington, D.C. And we fortuitously kind of came across SOSO and what you were all about during that period of time, and really became fascinated with the work that you're doing. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about the origin of the company, how you sort of, I think, began more in the arts and education space, and sort of how you started focusing towards the healthcare space. Were there some things that happened in your business, some ideas, some energy? If you could talk a little bit about that would be great to hear.
Yeah, Eric, want me to?
Yeah, why don't you give the first part of the SOSO history, and I'll pick it up where we transitioned into health.
Cool, yeah. I'll give you the run up to the healthcare work. So Eric and I met as undergrads at MIT. I was studying architecture. He was studying computer science and electrical engineering. We had a third close friend, Justin, who was interested in physics. But we all were kind of multidisciplinary, right brain, left brain kind of people. And we came together over a love of music and arts and creativity, and created this group called SOSO, which began as an audiovisual performance group. We initially in nightclubs and with live music, and then moving into much more artistic, content-rich performances. By night, we were doing that, and by day, we were all three working at an exhibition design firm, building cutting-edge interactive exhibitions. And the two of those things really came together to form what SOSO is today.
At some point in our history, I think a bunch of different threads. I mean, for me personally, a bunch of threads came together. In my own life, I started to prioritize wellness through a bunch of different practices, emotional, spiritual, physical practices. But in our practice too, I think in the background, we started to see how a lot of technology in the world wasn't necessarily contributing to wellness, but in fact, detracting from it for people. And there were some moments, we did this big kinetic sculpture, always intended it to be a very calming presence. But the day that we turned this thing on, I'll never forget, my whole heart rate slowed down and my breathing slowed down. And it was this real opening to wow, we can use technology, we can use digital design to bring wellness into the built environment.
Well, I mean, both of our businesses know full well the challenges that exist in the healthcare space right now. You talk about that a bit in your 5 design principles, your 5 health design principles that you've published, that research piece, demographic shifts. You've talked about patient isolation, staff burnout. So, if we can, let's talk about the 5 principles a bit.
So, we had talked internally a little bit about healthcare as a really interesting space to explore. And we were really starting to look at places where can digital experience design have a real impact in people's lives. We've also had personal experiences with family and friends in healthcare environment. And then we embarked on this internal project, a research and speculative design project based on both our experience and expert interviews. Mm-hmm. And we met with a lot of really interesting people across the healthcare spectrum for one-on-one interviews. And then it culminated in a workshop that we held here in the SOSO studio, where we invited 4 senior level designers and healthcare professionals into our space for a deep dive into the issues. Really kind of spearheaded and guided by our advisor, Ken Turner, who was former president of Canon Design. And through that process and our own independent research, we arrived at this report that had 5 top-level principles. And then with each of those principles, we paired it with speculative design that was based heavily on past work we had proved in the market. So it wasn't purely pie in the sky stuff. It was really thinking about how do we apply 20 years of our experience into this new space.
Just kind of thinking of the first principle, and I know they're not necessarily in any order of hierarchy per se, but the first principle being around the value of care work and the caregiving community. That one, I believe, results sort of in your gratitude canvas project. Yeah. And that one's very fascinating. I think that one's got some legs actually today, right now, that you're working on. If you can maybe talk a little bit about that principle and that process and how that's coming along.
When we started this project, we approached healthcare really just through the eyes of the patient. And we were pretty narrow-mindedly looking at this as sort of a patient experience. But what we quickly learned is healthcare is a workplace, and it's a really high-stakes, challenging workplace. And it felt like one of the most acute problems that healthcare was facing was staffing issues, right? We were coming out of the pandemic. There were incredible demands on nurses, staff, and doctors. There was extremely high levels of burnout leading to high turnover. It's a major source of cost for the providers. And then what we've also learned talking with doctors and nurses is that when you don't have a strong team, it's really hard to have strong patient outcomes, positive patient outcomes.
And I think that's a universal aspect of all the ideas we're going to share today is that they are looking at how do you support people's well-being, and then how do you use digital experience to bring those elements into the experience. And so for this one, it was like expressing gratitude. It is like one of the most simple acts you can do, and without fail, positively affects the receiver and the giver. And so we thought, like, what is it? What does a digital infrastructure for gratitude exchange look like? And the answer was, we've been working with these digital displays that supported different kinds of sending text-based content into the built environment in a way that wasn't a screen. They come from like retail displays. They're these little LED bars. And we basically thought, okay, this is a really nice way to allow people to see and receive messages in public. And then the way we arrived at, how that actually happens is it's a hospital. It's a transient environment. People are coming in and out. And a lot of times people don't want to be there. They want to get out pretty quick. And we've been working with text messaging as a way to interact with digital experiences.
It's super low touch. It interfaces really easy with the hospital. And
unattached to the
unattached.
Which is a big plus for infection control and all those kinds of other considerations. Yeah.
That got us thinking about how healthcare environments are full of everything is mobile. Everything is on wheels. And that's a really interesting design constraint. We can build this installation that can move from location to location, so we can test its efficacy if it's back of house versus if it's patient facing. And there's all kinds of ways we can experiment.
Yeah. It also plays into that kind of whole person, which is one of the other principles, like really embracing a holistic understanding of health. And it's like, there's this language of these carts that get rolled around a hospital and people get hooked up to them and they might take measurements or deliver medicine or deliver oxygen. But what about a cart that comes and delivers messages of gratitude? Or what about a cart that comes and delivers like pleasant vibrations of the feeling of waves on the sand? There's thinking about this same model, but expanding the health it delivers to the patient. Yeah.
I was going to say one of my personal favorites, which I think is still maybe just a prototype, was the one around, I think it was principle number 3, about increasing the agency and independence of the patients and the caregivers. And there's a real emotional component to it. It was the illuminated feelings.
Yes.
Project. I mean, as an architect and somebody who spent a lot of time in the interior space, lighting is always one of these great elements of design. And so that one just personally speaking, that stood out for me. So I was curious to maybe learn selfishly a little bit more about how that one came about, where it stands, what your thoughts are about that one.
So like for this one, we've done a lot of work with turning textual responses, whether they're text messages or voice, into displays of color. This idea of emotions being expressed and not overridden. And that's, you come to a hospital and there's a lot of feelings come up and there's really not spaces to express those feelings and to actually feel those feelings. And so what if we can create opportunities for people in a hospital to actually find catharsis, to actually experience sadness, to experience, their anger, whatever it might be. So it's a room you go into, there's a microphone, and you are invited to express your feelings and your emotions. And those are transmuted into these beautiful displays of color on the wall. So the room responds, almost like transforms your emotions into these beautiful animations of color.
Thinking a little bigger picture of all these ideas and all these concepts and prototypes that are results of your work and your exploration. How far off are we from seeing this become a little bit more commonplace?
To make change, we've got to speak the language of healthcare. We've got to find simple ways to integrate this work into the environment. Things like moving to something like a mobile cart, and then we've got to test it, and we've got to be able to go back to the decision makers who, spend their whole life looking at data and show them, hey, this is effective. We ran a handful of studies and this really did improve patient satisfaction, or this reduced turnover, or we got a measurable boost in staff morale because of this.
It's such a data-driven conversation. It really evidence and data-driven conversation, which is, it's always been a sort of tension for me, because I'm like, don't you see the sort of obviousness of the effect of these things on well-being? Like, we all know it. We all know it in our bones.
Absolutely.
When we view the world through science, we can only know it through the numbers.
Yeah, you're definitely starting to see it become more prevalent on, let's say, the margins, like spaces for like kind of boutique spaces for wellness are starting to embrace this. And, I don't know if it's hit your typical hospital yet, but you start to see it, and maybe it begins more in pediatric hospitals. There are these access points, and then from that it becomes an accepted standard.
Yeah, that's another thing that always kind of makes me, I don't know whether it's the word is chuckle or not, but it's like you find these kinds of experiences in pediatric hospitals. Like, it's acceptable to make this investment for children because we know that children are in a state of play, and we know that they're going to have a positive effect on them. Whereas adults have totally lost that sense of connection to the environment, to play. And so, like, it's a harder lift to make the case that this is going to help grown-ups, which is the big joke of being a grown-up anyway. Like, yeah.
That's beautifully put. I mean, Eric, you guys both, you in your work, you use those phrases, play, wonder is a word that you use quite a bit, and we think about it the same way. I think it's important to maintain that sense and have that permeate every kind of project that you're trying to bring to life here. I got one last question, and I'll let you go.
Yeah,
one last question. Okay, and it's the big one, which is sort of my what if. Somebody shows up at your doorstep tomorrow, blank checkbook, they're ready to go at something. What is a project that is either in production, is in a prototyping stage, or something you've thought about, or might be a new idea, and maybe you're in the middle of something that you don't necessarily want to reveal yet, but what if you had that scenario and could bring something to life next month?
For me, it's reach, and the thing that I can imagine that would have the most reach for us is we're launching a new venture around using AI to connect people and help them work together. And for me, it's like, can we build an agent that can bring people together, that can bring two people or more people together in physical space? By, whether it's something that's on your phone or whatever it might be. To me, that's the most exciting thing. Like, how can we scale the impact that we're having on people's well-being?
I think as a studio, we used to think very much about the one-offs, the custom. But I think these days we're really interested in ways in which we could take all of that knowledge and encapsulate it in products that could have impact at scale. And healthcare was in some ways our first attempt at looking at things from the lens of like a product. That was the key, was like, medical buyers in the healthcare space buy products. They don't want an untested custom thing. They want a proven solution that's going to have this positive impact. And that just sent us on that path. So now we're looking at sort of whether it's an app or some sort of a distributed experience where we can really scale the impact. There's sort of infinite potential scale of the same design principles that we've been working with at a singular level.
Yeah.
Well, we're big fans. Our podcast of Wellness and Wonders definitely geared and focused towards our healthcare work that we do, and we're excited to keep talking to other people that are working in that space and, endeavoring to do similar kinds of things that we both are. I really, really appreciate your time. It's great talking to you both. I'm sure we're going to have plenty more to talk about together and share ideas. And I look forward to a lot of the other discussions we're going to have. And kudos to you guys. Wishing you much success with everything. A huge thanks to John and Eric for helping us launch Wellness and Wonder with their interesting and informative insights on designing for wellness. As you can see, they are both very passionate and knowledgeable about this topic. To you, our audience, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and hopefully learned a thing or two. To learn more about their 5 design principles, as well as all the other great work they're doing, please check them out at sosolimited.com. I hope you get a chance to tune in for our next episode, where I will be speaking with an amazing and thoughtful designer from San Francisco, Ms. Maria Mortati, about her memory care experience station, which, by the way, was a finalist in Fast Company's 2022 World Changing Ideas Awards. And then lastly, to learn more about the creative patrons behind this podcast and how our full team is driving innovation in the spaces we build, come check us out at bialik.com. That's BIALEK.com. And follow us on Instagram at Bialik Social. Until the next time, stay well and keep on wondering.